What is up, everyone? Today we are talking sustainability, climate change, climate action. And while we're waiting for people to log on and join in, let me know where you're coming at us from today. Where are you logging in from? Where are you watching this? What classroom, what state, what country, what town, what office? Let us know where you're at. You can also follow this on social. This is live on my Twitter. You can follow us afterwards, tag us, make sure you post about it. We want to get your questions answered today. And so make sure as you're watching this, you're dropping your questions in the chat for us. And so I just want to welcome you to today's Flipgrid live event. My name is Mike Smith. I'm your host. I'm coming to you live from Lincoln, Nebraska. And today and next Tuesday, we're going to introduce you to some insanely talented young people. And this is the next generation. They are solving the problems of tomorrow. These are our sustainability leaders, and they're using their voice and actions to make a difference. And they're going to be doing some really cool stuff and sharing their journey with us. So if you're here to learn about how to be a leader in climate change and making a difference in your community, or you're just here for some good old inspiration, you have come to the right place. And so we're going to get started. Today, I want to welcome a Pulitzer Center reporting fellow, a journalist, and a poet, Irene Vázquez, to our Flipgrid live event. Thanks for being here today, Irene.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
Of course, we're excited to hear and learn from you today. And so first question I've got for you today is why journalism and poetry? Like, how did that start?
Yeah, so I've always loved books. My day job, aside from the journalism and poetry thing, is I work at a children's and young adult publisher. So I get to spend my days reading books. So that love kind of never went away. I was an only child, and my parents, I think, struck gold in the fact that they could always just hand me a book and I would plop myself down and entertain myself for hours. When I was younger, I really loved things like the Percy Jackson series by Rick Riordan and Esperanza Rising by Pam Munoz-Ryan. And as I grew up, I continued to love words, and I joined my school newspaper when I was in high school. As my parents and some of my teachers may remember from middle and high school, I've always had what might politely be described issues with authority. I've liked to test people's boundaries on issues that I don't necessarily think are fair or just. And I realized that journalism and writing was a good way to channel that for good, and to channel that kind of natural inclination I had to speak out. As for poetry, I was very emo when I was in high school. I had a lot of very big feelings, and I think that poetry found me rather than the other way around. It became a way that I could, channel these big feelings I had and make a sense of the world. And I still find that to be true, even when it's, less angsty, this boy doesn't like me, and more, how do I wrestle with, the climate crisis and these issues of environmental racism?
I love that. I can relate to being the emo kid in high school so much. I wrote some really sappy song lyrics back in my day. That was my version of poetry back when I was in high school. And so, by chance, do you have like some poetry that you've written that you would you'd feel comfortable sharing with us today? Do you have anything that you could snag for us?
I'd love to. This is a poem that I wrote last year called "Heaven is a Muddy River." Speaking of songs, I influence a lot of songs and songwriting in my poetry. This is inspired by a line from the song "Evergreen" by Yeba. I love Yeba; she's a gorgeous voice. I can talk a little bit because it has to do with what we're talking about today, which is environmental racism. But I'll read it first. It's called "Heaven is a Muddy River." Mama stopped drinking the water after Daddy passed. She gets it delivered now, Ozarka in big jugs. She was given a truth, an insurance check, turned it over and over in the nights, unmoving like a precious relic, like a polished stone. States away, I still sleepwalked the riverbank, begged to relive even the barest morning, the time catching trout Cassie snagged my arm with her fish hook, harvesting the June tomatoes, his steamboat laugh, even the nights I'd hear him praying for a son. My daughter only knows his charcoal outline, the rubbings of a grave. I tell her stories of how she was born, sculpted from stardust and red clay. In the dream, undone promises fog up the marshland, and the river is frozen over as though I'm ready to forgive. I know it's just as hard in heaven, but I still want to swim. So that's a poem I wrote. It's inspired by my, thank you,
Very
by my mom's and my grandmother's experiences growing up in Southern Alabama. My grandfather passed away before I got the chance to meet him when my mom was in her 20s, of colon cancer. And later on, after he died, the town, which is predominantly, it's like 60% Black, it's a very small town in southern Alabama, was shown to be a cancer cluster because of these. It hasn't really been thoroughly studied yet, but we believe that it's because of, runoff. There's a lot of paper mills in the area, and from runoff that was kind of in the water supply. So my grandmother, even before I really knew why, she was always very insistent on, drinking bottled water, not trusting the water sources. And so it was just something that stayed with me for a very long time. And I wanted to put it into a poem to kind of deal with this, the sense of absence that I've felt with this grandfather that I've never had the chance to know, and how kind of that grief lingers and the causes of it. So
that it's so powerful. And I think what's awesome is you're using an outlet to deal with your emotions and the things that you're going through. And we all go through stuff, everybody's got their stuff, and it's cool to hear your way of using your emotions and the things that you're working through, and you put that into your poetry, and it's a way of giving you some healing and some growth. And I think that's awesome. And I think that's really beneficial. It makes me want to bust out like a pen and paper and keep, like I got to move past sad emo lyrics though. I'll find my lane. But so talk to me about how specifically like environmental racism and like just that whole conversation. I think for a lot of us, it's a new conversation, but just like, how is this a passion for you? Like, why is this something we should care about? I'd love to hear that from you.
Yeah. So Dr. Robert Bullard, who is a professor at Texas Southern University and considered, one of the fathers of the contemporary environmental justice movement, defines environmental racism as any policy or practice that differentially affects or disadvantages, whether consciously or not, individuals, groups, or communities based on race. But I think that's kind of something that's easier to understand in practice, right? So oftentimes, the phrase Black Lives Matter has become, a refrain, and it's often used when we talk about police brutality, right? That Black Lives Matter just as much as any other person's life, that we have the right to a jury trial, to not face disproportionate police violence, to not be deemed guilty just for being Black. When it comes to environmental racism, we often see that Black lives are systemically devalued. So when, say, like a company is choosing where to put a plant where they're likely going to dump pollutants in a river or expel cancer-causing chemicals in the air, sometimes they'll act in a manner that is environmentally racist would mean that they either subconsciously or not, see a Black community, see a town like the town that my mother grew up in, and they're like, okay, like that's 60% Black, like they decide that those health outcomes matter less, and they'll go ahead and pollute there. So, and they also know that those people are more than likely going to face an uphill battle in speaking out against these problems, that because Black lives have been systemically devalued in our society, that they'll have a harder time speaking out. So those are the kinds of things that we talk about when we talk about environmental racism, is that communities of color, Black communities, oftentimes that intersect, of course, with, because of the intersecting nature of these things, low-income communities face disproportionately disproportionately bad environmental outcomes.
Okay, absolutely. And I think that you can see the link to your past. Like you can see that passion and the link to your past. And so it's cool to be able to draw that. And so how do we act? And there's so much about awareness that's important, but it's like, okay, how does someone act? Like, what can we do?
Yeah. So I think the very simplest thing that I was thinking of when I was, prepping for this talk today is that, naming environmental racism as the problem, like not just, I think it's, why do we say that all lives matter is not something great to say? It's because, these are things that affect people in different communities. So naming environmental racism as the problem. So saying okay, I understand that the environmental crisis is something that is disproportionately going to be affecting communities of color in our country and around the world. I think oftentimes a climate crisis can feel like something that's very far away for some people, but for others, it is affecting us right now. When I think of, I was born in New Orleans, and I was there when Hurricane Katrina hit. We had evacuated, but I was impacted by that as a child. And after that, we moved to Houston, and Hurricane Harvey hit there when I was getting ready to go off to college. And, for some people it's on the coast, and again, it's the thing that for me is both a heartening thing and makes the climate crisis so hard to think about and talk about, is the fact that all of the other injustices that exist in our society are exacerbated by the climate crisis. So I think, talking about solutions and actions, naming environmental racism as the problem, the climate crisis as something that is part of ongoing crises of exploitation and colonization. In terms of something that people can do, I think it also gave me hope, and I was able to figure out how to take action better when I really focused on the local level. I started reading local news. I started finding out kind of what local and state-based actions were being taken in my community to protect people, to put good regulations in place, to keep companies in check against polluting disproportionately in neighborhoods of color. Find out like what the local environmental agencies are that are creating these policies, and get involved. And I think when you think about it at the local level, like, yes, climate change is something that's going to affect everyone around the world, but it's so much easier to kind of conceptualize when you're like, okay, like, this is the environmental agency that is in charge of regulating the laws around who can put chemicals in the air in my community. That's something that I can go to a community forum. I can write a letter. I can talk to my local newspaper. That's something that, it's on a scale that I can take action. So
I love that. And it's so practical, and it's right in front of us. Start where you are, start at home, and start with the problems in front of you. And I think that's so important, because I live in Lincoln, Nebraska, and so we see climate change so much differently than a hurricane or two hurricanes like you would have, but it is happening here in our town, and there are things that we can do to impact that. And so that's a really cool reminder to start where you're at and start local. I love that. So this part of our conversation, we do what we call kind of a deep dive. And so we toss some prompts or some questions at you, and it gives you a chance to just dive a little bit deeper. So you cool jumping into this deep dive portion of our conversation?
Let's go.
Awesome. All right. Well, the first question we've got for you is,
yeah, so I'd say first, I would just echo my last point, pay attention to local government, because that's where a lot of, small scale change is happening, but it's really important change to get involved with. Two, I would say this is a way to fight it is like to understand the climate crisis is now. To understand, there are things in your community that you can be doing now to stand up for communities of color where you are. And three, look for the intersections. Something that I think that is, again, both can be disheartening, but also can be very empowering about the climate crisis, is that I think that it's going to be something that is going to take all of our individual skills in order to fight. So whether you whether you grow up, you want to work in housing, or you want to work in education, or you want to work in whatever kind of area, all of those skills are going to be necessary to solve the problems that climate change is going to cause. So look at the ways at which your unique skill set can help address these problems.
I love that. I love the individualizing of it. That's so cool and so helpful. Thank you for that. Cool. Awesome. All right. The next one we've got for you.
Yeah, so first, this is a simple one. Take public transit and advocate for it. I grew up in a place that doesn't have excellent public transit. Houston is kind of well known for being a city that's full of sprawl. But even so, I think there are ways, to reduce your consumption, which leads me into my second point, which is think critically about your consumption. That's hard for me. I love online shopping. I love putting things on my little virtual bookmark to buy for later. But I think that a lot of society is structured to view us as consumers, and to encourage us to consume rather than to thrift or to reuse something or to borrow something from a friend. So start to think critically about your consumption and see where you can cut back. And then I'm always saying, local, get involved with community gardens or local action groups, finding out what plants are native to your area. Like, I think it also makes you more inclined to want to fight for the environment when you know what's going on where you are.
Absolutely. Yeah. So cool. Sometimes we have these things in our mind where like the conversation seems so far out in front of us, but again, this pull back to local is such a cool undertone, and I love it. Awesome. All right. We've got one more for you.
I feel like I give the same piece of advice every time, but it's because I believe in it so much, which is that find your niche. I wouldn't have thought when I started writing poetry, however many years ago it was, maybe more than 10 years ago, that I would be using it to address these issues of, environmental racism and climate change. So if this is something that you're passionate about, think through like, your natural skills and find your niche, find what you can bring to helping solve this global problem.
I love it. I love that. There's such a cool thing about looking at environment and the impact you can have, thinking about like your own journey and your own self. Like when you were talking about online shopping and the vehicles you drive, I was being like critical of my own environmental footprint and was like, oh my God, I have so much work to do. And so it's cool. It's really cool. And I appreciate just the thoughtfulness on it. And so we love taking questions from the chat. So if you're watching this today, if you're in a classroom or a business or wherever you're at, toss some questions you've got in the chat. I'll read those out here in a second. And then I'm also going to ask a couple questions that I've got on my own. And so my first question I have for you is, if you're at a school and you've got a group of friends and they're really passionate and there's like 3 or 4 of them and they're all looking at each other right now and they're like, what do we do? Like, you know what I mean? What would be some advice if there's a teacher and some students kind of right now, how they can work together? What would maybe be 1 or 2 ideas you could toss out for a school-based project like that or a community-based project?
Yeah, for sure. This is something that I have like an oddly passionate drive for, I think because of the issues that affect me back home in Houston where I grew up. But things, very simple things or like air monitors or just like thinking about, I think what can be cool for a group of students and a teacher is just kind of like, analyze the environment where you are. So like think through like, are you in a place where like droughts are the way that like you're being impacted by the climate crisis? Are you in a place where you're getting disproportionate amounts of rainfall? Like, are you flooding more? And then thinking through like, okay, like I said before, like these intersections, like how is that going to impact our school? Like if we're going to have a drought more this year, like, and we have flowers, can we maybe advocate for the school to like move towards more like native plants here rather than a lawn? Can we do something like that? Are we going to need to like start collecting rainwater to collect these plants if there's going to be some sort of like a restrictions on water usages? If you're getting more water than usual or you're getting a different kind of like climate issue, just thinking through like what are going to be the issues that our particular place is going to face, and like here in this building, like how is our built environment, how is the place where we live gonna be impacted by that?
Very cool. Very cool. Very practical, of course. I really appreciate just the attention to making it attainable and achievable. Sometimes again, we think we can't do anything, and people older than us or in different jobs than us are the ones who solve those problems, but there really are ways we can make an impact at home, which is so cool. And so I really appreciate just your thoughtfulness and how much intention you put into the solutions that you offer for all of us to be able to just implement into our daily lives. And so, Irene, do you have any final thoughts for us that you want to just say or anything you want to leave us for before we sign off today?
Yeah, I mean, as much as I do like to emphasize that, starting local, starting where you are, is that, it is going to take everyone. Like recycling is as much as it's something that I do advocate for, because I think it's a powerful tool in understanding our individual role in, climate, in addressing the climate crisis. Like, I think those things have to be done in tandem with like powerful collective action. Like I really love the things that like the Sunrise Movement is doing. They did this really incredible walk from, I think, DC, like all the way to like across the country. I know they passed through New Orleans and Houston at some point this past summer. And so if that's the way you felt called to use your voice, like finding some sort of community action group where you can get plugged in and, the more voices, one person alone can do something, but also 5, 10, 100 people are going to have a larger collective impact. So if that's something, join a group, find some folks, find like-minded people who want to be working on things with you.
I love that. And that is exactly what we believe here at Flipgrid, is that student voice matters and that we need to amplify those voices. And so I love that. Hop in and use your voice where you can. And so, Irene, thank you so much for your time today. It was really cool chatting with you, and I look forward to seeing the impact you continue to make. And so thank you again for your time. It was really cool.
Thank you. Have a great afternoon, Mike.
Absolutely. You too. And so, if you learned something today, if you enjoyed this, speaking of a group you can hop into, flipgrid.com/environmental racism is a place where you can drop video questions for Irene or Tell us what you learned about this. Tell us what you plan to go try and change or do. And we're excited to see your videos. She's going to hop in there and try to answer as many of those as she possibly can. And so thank you for tuning in today. Next week, we're meeting with 3 phenomenal students who are working on some really unique problems. And we're excited to introduce you to them. We're excited for you to get inspired by their work. Your learners are going to be able to learn a ton about young people solving some of the world's biggest problems. And so if you're excited and you want to join us, the link is aka.ms/TKS. And we look forward to seeing you joining us next week as we continue to talk about environmental racism. We talk about climate change, climate action, and all the ways that we can make a local sustainable impact in our communities. And so thanks for kicking it with us today in today's Flipgrid Live event. Appreciate you being here, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Have a good rest of your week, y'all.